So, hello. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome David C. Barnett. David is an author and consultant and international speaker who has helped thousands of entrepreneurs avoid bad deals, buy better businesses, ultimately achieve successful exits. He's one of the most trusted voices in the world of business buying and selling, and his work has a real impact on entrepreneurs and business owners. Um, Through his YouTube channels and podcasts, David reaches a worldwide audience of buyers and sellers, sharing practical, no nonsense advice that helps people make better decisions and avoid costly mistakes that can derail a deal. So, on a personal note, David is also someone that I had the privilege of knowing for a decade. Not it's That's how old we are. And then I can honestly say that he's been an inspirational, so for so many businesses now, owners, including me. And he's the kind of person that is very generous with his time. He teaches with clarity, leads with integrity, and genuinely wants people to succeed. So welcome. So David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's like you're trying to make me cry. That's so nice.
From the age or from it's like we're growing old. Yeah, I still have the picture of the day that we actually met somewhere.
It was at
It's
a
cool.
networking lunch, I think, at a
Yeah, at
banquet hall
Cocoa
that
Room or something like that.
yeah, it was run by some ladies who did weddings and things, and they
Yeah,
did a networking lunch. I remember that. Yeah.
yeah. I think we were both a little bit more chubby at that time. That being said, David, congratulations, 77,000 followers on YouTube, subscribers on
Yeah.
YouTube. That's pretty impressive.
Well, it is for a grown-up topic, I think, because obviously there's people on YouTube with millions of
Yeah.
followers, but my videos are notoriously not entertaining. They are
Well, it
informative.
depends, right? Yeah, exactly,
They're
right?
informative and they answer people's questions and people learn from them. But I don't think I have many viewers that just tune in because they want to see if I'm going to say something funny or whatever. And so, YouTube has been instrumental for me building my business
Yeah.
because I treat YouTube like an evergreen search engine. When people go and type a question into Google about something to do with a business transaction, buying or selling a business, chances are one of my videos has answered that question. And so it comes up as one of the results. And what's interesting is that if I go and I look at my most popular videos for the last 90 days, it's not uncommon for 6 or 7 of the top 10 to be videos from years ago. So they continue to get views even though they're older.
Well, I think it's a subject that never grows old, although that, legislations and things like that don't change fast enough in order for things to be, not so, you they don't get old easily, I think. Um, but also you have written many, many books.
Mhm.
Where are you at now? I lose count. I should have went and
I,
counted them on
I released
Amazon.
one. I released one last year, and for the first time, I co-authored a book. So that co-authored book was number 10, and my first book came out in
Congratulations.
2014. Thanks. What I learned about writing books over the years is that in the beginning, I thought that a book had to have a certain length. Like I thought if it wasn't 150 pages, it wasn't a book.
Yeah.
And that kind of came from me searching around the internet and my own experience. And I guess it comes from like book marketing because you want it to be thick enough so that the spine will actually like hold the title
Yeah.
of the book. But what I've learned over the years is actually if you can make your book smaller, more concise, and direct to the point without a lot of fluff, people actually appreciate it more. Because of course my books aren't fiction; they're how-to books. And I consider Amazon to be another part of our marketing funnel for the consulting business because some people out there, when they're looking at doing a transaction, they go looking for a book on the topic. And so I've tried to have different books with different titles that are going to come up based on people's searches and be able to inform people through the books. And then, of course, a lot of those people end up in my YouTube audience, or if they say, "Hey, I want to work with this guy, I want his help," and so they end up reaching out directly and end up working with us.
Would you call yourself a strategic entrepreneur?
No, I'd call myself a teacher, um, and a student, because what I do in my business is I work with all kinds of different people, but I help them all do the same thing, which is to work on these transactions. So I become like a clearinghouse of experiences in this specific kind of action. And the benefit for my clients going forward is that when they come to me, chances are I've seen other people in exactly the same situation. And so it helps me to more quickly give them a heads up, or set expectations as to what they can expect could happen or may happen, or what problems might appear, just because I've seen it before. And really, that's, I think, why people come to us for help with these transactions, is they want someone who's been through it before. And because of the experience, we cut through information and files so much more quickly than if it was, someone new. If you go to anyone who's got a lot of experience with numbers and you give them enough time, they're going to figure out different ways to analyze a business and give an opinion of what they think is going on. The question is, are you going to be able to get through it fast enough and find the problems before somebody, commits money to a deal, or borrows money from a bank or something like that? And so moving through the files quickly is part of the value proposition too. I'm just working with someone, actually, a client in the States, who's buying an HVAC company, so heating, ventilation, air conditioning, etc. And what is common in the small business space is that people will talk a lot about their income statements. They'll talk about their sales and their expenses and their profits, but most entrepreneurs don't really put a lot of focus on balance sheets. But for a lot of different businesses, balance sheets are really important, especially if you are selling to other businesses who might take 30 or 40 or 60 days to pay you. And so, one of the things that in this particular file that we're uncovering is that the business is very profitable. It's true, but the amount of operating capital being tied up in the business that is required for it to function is far greater than we would have expected. And that certainly impacts the price of the business, because if somebody is going to buy the business and then has to put in a bunch of their own money into their own new operating entity to finance their customers, then it means that both of those sums of money are the investment. And that's always the framework that we try to look at, is not what are you paying for the business, but what is the overall investment? What is the cash flow you're obtaining? And how likely is it that the cash flow will continue into the future? And does it make sense at that price? It's, people who buy a business are entrepreneurial, but I don't necessarily call them entrepreneurs. They are more of a investor mindset type of group of people, because they're not taking the risk to build something new based on a vision, or what they want to create. They're more interested in saying, what kind of cash flow can I obtain in exchange for the money I'm ready to invest? It's a very different kind of mind space to be in when you're out in the marketplace.
What is, I guess, so for the majority of people that come to you, what is their biggest pain point?
Well, they don't want to make a bad deal, because and I like to compare buying versus starting a business all the time. Back in 2024, I released a book called Buying versus Starting a Small Business. And so when people start a business, they often think, well, this is going to be risky. And we know the statistics on business startups are quite grim. A lot of businesses don't succeed. But if you save up some money and maybe borrow on your credit card and you start some kind of business and it fails, well, you've lost the money that you saved up, and maybe you have a balance outstanding on your credit card. Like, most people will end up surviving that in one way or another. But if you buy an existing business and you overpay, or you overcommit the cash flow to debt service, and you borrow a huge sum of money from a bank, you're actually putting yourself in the same position. Because now, if you lose any of the revenues, if sales go down by 5 or 10%, businesses are asymmetrical systems. So a 10% decline in revenue could represent a 30 or 40% decline in profit. And if you've overcommitted your profitability to servicing debt, you could be in a position where the only way you can make your debt service is by cutting your own salary, for example. And if the business fails, not only did you lose your down payment money, but now you still have a personal guarantee to the bank loan. And so these failures often result in insolvency to some degree, a bankruptcy or something like that. And so it, I recommend that people buy a business over starting one because you have that cash flow established, but it's not risk free. You're just trading one kind of risk for another. You're trading the startup risk for financing risk. And this is why the price that you pay becomes so important. If you cross a certain line, then you really have not gained any of the advantages of doing an acquisition. There's got to be enough meat left on the bone when you do a deal for you to make money. You're um, when people are paying money to buy a business, they are paying to avoid the uncertainty of a startup, and they are paying to put themselves into the shoes of the current owner, like what the current owner gets to enjoy. And even though that's not really what they end up with, because every business that gets sold, the business that's received is not the same as the business that was sold, because the sellers often don't have, a lot of debt. Someone might be enjoying a cash flow from their business of $300,000 a year. The buyer buys that business, borrows a big sum of money to do the acquisition, and maybe they've committed 150 or 160,000 a year to debt service. Well, if everything maintains itself, they might be able to enjoy $140,000 of cash flow. But if there's any kind of hiccup, they're losing out. Down in the United States, the Small Business Administration puts out statistics about default rates on their loans. And a lot of people will point to those very low default rates and say, look, small business isn't risky. But I always point out to people that there's a huge difference between defaulting on a loan and not being successful in business. Just because over the years I've been doing this, oh my God, it's been 18 years I've been doing this now. I have met so many people who literally are working for no compensation in a business they own just because they want to make sure they can make every bank payment. And I'm sure banks love those customers, but I don't want to see any of my clients end up in a situation like that.
This might be a weird questions, but like what I see a lot in our world is that for a product company, it's easier to have a specific evaluation. But for a service company, like consultants or all things like that, that is a little bit more ambiguous to have a specific, what are you actually buying from those companies? So, can you talk to us a little bit about what is, what people are buying when they are purchasing a company?
Yeah. So there's a word called goodwill, and it's used in a couple of different ways. The accounting definition of goodwill is simply the difference between the price that you're paying for a business and the price of its tangible assets. So if you're buying a business that builds foundations for houses, they've got a bunch of equipment, some dump trucks, backhoes, equipment like that. So that business, if you were going to buy it for $500,000 and they have $400,000 worth of equipment, we would say it has $100,000 of goodwill. But if there was a service business, like a consulting firm, that also, you decided was worth $500,000, that business has got some furniture and computers. There's hardly anything in the way of assets. Most of that business is goodwill. So once we know that there's a certain amount of goodwill, the next question is, where does the goodwill reside? And is it actually something that can be transferred to the person that's buying the business? And so the best way to think about this is why are people doing business with that company? So in the case of a business like a McDonald's franchise, people are going to McDonald's because they're familiar with the Big Mac and they've seen the ads their whole life and they know the golden arches. And it doesn't really matter who's working at McDonald's or who actually owns that individual location. As long as the Big Mac comes out looking like it should, the customers are going to be happy, right? And so in that example, the goodwill is entirely with that brand. And that's why people want to buy a McDonald's franchise, because they get to hitch their fortunes to the brand immediately that people already know. A business like a consulting firm, why are people going to that consulting firm? Is it because the individual who heads up that firm is a particularly talented person in a certain field? And are people really doing business with that person versus doing business with the firm? And so that's a very different question. And for the vast majority of consulting firms, it's the individual that people want to engage with. That person has a certain experience, background, etc. For my company, people are coming to me because they want to do business with me. They saw me on YouTube, they read a book I wrote, they're coming to me because they want to talk to me about their deal, they want me to look at their numbers, etc. It really is something special for a consultant to be able to take what they know, create processes and systems around it that can truly be transferred and taught to other people so that people don't care who the consultant is. And so this is where you get, like McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group, and we can only name a few of those. Like it's pretty rare. I know that there are other kinds of consulting firms like engineering firms or like wastewater consultants and things like this. And what those guys are doing is they're applying certain methodologies that are taught to their engineers, in engineering school kind of thing. And so they're kind of layering their special sauce, as it were, their special systems over some basic building blocks of knowledge and methodology that those people would have learned when they're going through their program. And so it can be kind of easier for that kind of consulting firm to develop true goodwill in a brand name kind of way because it's people applying their regular professional skills maybe in a certain way versus somebody who comes up with something entirely unique that, you know, then the question becomes, if I buy that firm, how long will it take before everyone accepts that I can deliver the same results as the seller? And so when those kinds of businesses do manage to sell, and sometimes they do, what often then is part of the deal is figuring out how we're going to transfer the goodwill from the seller to the buyer. And this can mean that they work together for years. And you can have that established person that has the reputation hanging around at first full time and then maybe going into some kind of semi-retirement mode where they're less and less available. But this is one of the big risks that the buyers see is they say, how do I know that these people are going to come over to me? A common example of a professional practice that changes hands might be like an accounting firm. And I've worked on several different deals to help people buy and sell accounting firms. And the buyers, of course, are worried that the clients won't stick with them once they take over. So a common sort of structure for these kinds of deals would be that the buyer pays a certain amount of money down to the selling accountant. And then more payments are made over the course of several years after the transaction, but those payments are usually based upon the number of those legacy clients that continue to be with the new accountant, so that the seller actually has an interest in making sure that their clients stay with the new person. And this can be very important because it might mean that, in retirement on the golf course, the accountant runs into some clients who might say something about the new guy, and that older person's going to say, well, you know what, I chose to sell to them because I know they're a smart cookie and you're going to be okay. Like they have a vested interest in making sure that the clients are happy with the new person. And that's the kind of deal that you want to make sure that you do as a buyer. And it often has more to do with deal structure than price. And for business owners, one of the big revelations that they often leave with whenever I do any kind of session or group work with business owners is an appreciation for the fact that selling a business is not at all like selling a house or a car or anything like that. When you sell a business, the buyer has to be satisfied that the cash flow you enjoy is going to continue under their stewardship. And if they're not 100% satisfied that's going to be the case, the only way that they're going to buy the business is if there's some kind of structure that protects them. And what that often means, like I alluded to with the accountant, is some kind of deal structure where some of the money is paid out after the deal and is contingent to some degree on things working out the way the seller has promised.
So I'm guessing that you must see also all kinds of situations in regards to employees, right? When a company changes hands, like what type of security blanket can you put on either, having to keep employees or, not losing employees?
It's a great question. It's been for some time now that we don't actually own the employees anymore. Like, there's nothing you can do to prevent someone from quitting their job. And there's 101 reasons why someone might not want to come back to work tomorrow, right? And some of them are to do with the employer, and some of them are to do with the employees or accidents or someone meeting someone on a dating app and moving away, right? So this is one of the risks that buyers always get uptight about. How do I make sure that the key employees are going to stay? And if it's a business where the employees truly are key, that these individuals cannot be, replaced easily, then it's going to become part of the deal. And I've seen situations where sellers offer some kind of retention bonus to employees. Often the deal structure between the buyer and seller might be contingent upon certain employees staying for a certain period of time. But the easiest way to give a buyer ease about employees is to demonstrate how you're not actually dependent on them. And so a story I love to tell is about this time I sold a restaurant, and the buyer and seller were having a meeting with each other, and the buyer had never been in the restaurant industry. And he was really worried about this exact thing that you're talking about, employees leaving. And so I remember during this meeting, the buyer said, how do I know the employees are going to stick around? Because I'm really going to be relying on them, especially in the beginning, because they all know what they're doing and I don't. And the seller looked at him and said, it's a restaurant. I can guarantee you that a year from now, all of them will be gone. And then he immediately said, that's why I've worked so hard to figure out the best way to hire people and train them quickly. And then he went on to describe his hiring process, how he advertised for employees, how he was able to filter for, responsible people versus not immediately before even the first interview. He talked about the training packages that he used and how he was able to get people into a productive state within a couple of days of them starting to work. And he really put the buyer at ease that, yeah, when I buy this business, I'm going to be taught all of these systems and processes that are going to allow me to be confident that when someone leaves, I'll be able to get somebody else in their place relatively quickly. And in not every case is that possible. There are industries out here famously that are having a hard time with getting enough skilled workers. And that's when you have to start to question, what is it actually that holds the value? Is it the business and its brand name? Or is it simply the fact that there are, 6 technicians on their team that are going out and doing the work for the customers? And, we often talk about things like customer concentration or supplier concentration. Employees are suppliers. They're suppliers of labor. And they might have a fierce loyalty to the current owner. And that loyalty may be the thing that has trouble transferring to the new owner. And so these are the kinds of things that need to be examined when someone's looking at a business. I once had a conversation with a hair salon owner who told me that she actually believed she had 2 different client sets. She actually thought of the hairdressers that worked in the shop as clients as well. And she said, I'm always trying to think about how I can make my place the best place to work so that if they ever have a bad day, the last thing on their mind is walking out and quitting, because they'll think, well, where will I go? No other place will be as good as this one, right? And it always gave her the best choice of other people whenever she needed to hire, because people wanted to come and work at her place. And you don't find that attitude everywhere. But employees are suppliers. And if you're in an industry where you sometimes have to compete to get access to the supplies or the inputs that you need in your business, then it's something you have to consider. There is a technical business. I won't say more than that because I don't want to share any details about them, but they're growing into new markets. And they went into one community where there were 4 established companies, and each of these companies had 5 to 7 technical employees. And the company went to all 4 of these companies and said, we'd like to grow into this market. Would you be interested in selling? And all 4 owners said no. And this company doesn't like to start a new location. They would prefer to take something over where there's already employees, but there were no options. All 4 owners said no. So what they then started to do is they started to approach the employees. And they said, we will hire you to come work for us and we'll pay you 20% more than you earn now with one condition. only if you bring all your colleagues. And they actually recruited an entire team of technicians from one of these four businesses and started their own new shop without having to pay for the business. They essentially got the business just by recruiting the employees. And that, if that business that lost its employees had been purchased the year before, what did that buyer end up with? They ended up with nothing because their whole team walked out the door. And these are the kinds of risks that are the reality in business. And, I about 10, 15 years ago, well, I guess I've been on YouTube for 11 years. When I first went on YouTube, the people that I was meeting were pretty much in two groups pretty consistently for as far as business buyers went. There were mid-career professionals who had some degree of success in managing people in another organization, and they were successful personally. They had savings, home equity, good credit score, that kind of thing. So they were looking for an opportunity to level up typically. They knew they could do more with their life and career than their existing employer would provide for them. So they thought buying a business is going to be the thing I'm going to do. That's one group. The other group would be like newcomers to the country. So people that had some kind of background in their homeland, maybe they were an engineer, in Asia or something, and their professional credentials weren't going to be recognized here, but they needed an income. And so maybe that person could get a business in doing something to do with construction. So they could take advantage of their engineering knowledge, but they had to buy a business to get an income. Two groups. About 5 years ago, I started to meet an entirely new kind of buyer. And these were young people, some of them just out of school, some who'd never even had a job before. And they were looking for help to buy businesses because they had been convinced by online influencers that buying a business was a foolproof, easy way to instant riches and easy success because the profits were already there. All you had to do was borrow money, buy the business, and you would be instantly rich. And I see you smiling there because they really have no idea what they're getting into, right? And since that time, since this has become a big thing online, uh, and there's probably about 20 of these people now online that are all selling these $12,000 and $15,000 courses on how to buy a business and how easy it's going to be. And they are trying to basically take advantage of people's hopes and aspirations. When people do manage to do this without actually understanding what they're getting into, the results can be devastating because all of a sudden they end up in these businesses and they have to make all these decisions and they don't have any kind of background experience or wisdom to draw upon. And it can be really a bad thing. And so a lot of the times when I end up with people like this, I have to try to coach them to get them to understand exactly what it is that they're going to get involved in. And it's been funny because I've had some people where I've advised them like, you want to buy this catering company, like go get a job working at one just for a couple of months, like go see what it's like. And they'll come back and go, oh my God, I can't believe I almost did that. Like once they get an idea of what the real day to day can be like in these businesses, because sometimes it's a struggle to survive every day, and it's one nonstop problem after another. And you know, I'll often also hear these ideas. Well, you can just hire a manager, and I just find that so interesting to be as an idea because, and you know who falls for that, Natasha? It's people that come from these big corporate backgrounds. Because if you're in a big corporate
Right.
environment with hundreds of employees, you might understand your little thing very well. It's like you're focused on your one task and you do it really well. And you think that because you've mastered your task, that business is easy. And you don't even know what all the other, 490 people around you are doing with their day and all the things that they're handling. But when you go out and you buy a small business, um, all of those things land on your shoulders. Every single responsibility in the business. And in a big company, a lot of people have done each other's jobs. So if somebody just doesn't show up one day, there are often people around that can kind of cover, and you can make do until someone can be replaced. But in a small business, we deal with the problem that one of my clients calls bench depth. So if you only have 9 employees and 7 of them are customer facing, one of them is a person in the warehouse, and you're like in management, or even if you do have a manager and the manager can't come in one day, none of the other people actually can do what they do. And so the backup in a small business, regardless of who's got titles, always falls on the owner eventually. And there's always certain things about a small business that you will never delegate. I've never heard of a small business owner letting their manager go and negotiate a loan at the bank for a new piece of equipment that costs $300,000. Like there's certain C-level activities that will only ever be done by the owner. And in that vein, it's never possible to dissociate yourself 100% from what's going on in that business. It's always going to take a certain amount of your mental bandwidth. And I know that some people get into business through like a side hustle, like they'll try to keep their full-time career while they do something on the side. And I think there's certain kinds of businesses that might lend themselves to that a little bit easier than others. But ultimately, that person has to have flexibility in their career to be able to take those midday emergency calls or what have you, or else that's not going to work either. So I spend a lot of time trying to give people ideas about how they can better appreciate what they're about to get into if they don't have that firsthand small business management experience already.
So you've been doing this for 15 years. But what got you into this specific niche? How did you fall into it?
It's a great question. Um, because when I was in high school, this certainly didn't exist as a
Mm.
job. So I was always interested in entrepreneurship. And so I thought that meant I should go to business school. And so I went to business school. And after the first few years, I realized that they don't actually teach you how to be a business person at business school. What they teach you is how to be what I call a Fortune 500 bureaucrat. So, how to be a middle manager in a big organization. And I know there's some schools now with entrepreneurship programs and things like that. It's a little bit different now than it was back in the 90s. Um, and so when I got out of there, I took a stab at starting a business with a partner, and it went pretty well until he met a girl, moved to Toronto, and left me all alone. And so then I decided I should get a job. And that first little business involved me doing sales, and I was able to leverage that into a sales career with the Yellow Pages. And this was back in 1998. And so with the Yellow Pages, it was my job to go out and meet with the owners and managers of these small local businesses. And so I started to learn a little bit about everyone and how these different businesses make money, what kind of customers they wanted to have, what their challenges were, etc. After 7 years of doing that, I could start to tell, Google came around, we started to get smartphones, and I said, this Yellow Page thing isn't going to keep going forever. And so then I left to start a business with a friend. We actually found a really great franchise concept and tried to buy it, but they told us our market was too small. So we just ripped off the idea and copied it and kind of did it on our own. And after a year and a half, I realized that I wasn't happy doing that. I wanted to get back in front of business owners. And so we sold that business. So that was the first time I ever had a hand in selling a business. We sold that business. And
How old were you?
at that time,
Yeah,
I would have been like 24 or 25,
that's
maybe.
cool. Okay.
Yeah. And and then what I did is I found an opportunity advertised online to where this company was teaching people how to become commercial debt brokers and helping to arrange debts and commercial leases and things like this for small businesses. So I went and did a 3-day training program with them and learned how to be a commercial debt broker for small business. And I started this little practice, and things were going well. This was 2007 when I started this. And the next year was the great financial crisis. And a lot of the companies that I was using as a source of capital went under. They literally went out of business. And by that time, I had met people who had been looking for money to buy existing businesses. And I saw what I just thought was horrific. I saw these people who had no idea what they were doing, trying to be the intermediaries for these small business transactions. So, real estate agents, sometimes lawyers, sometimes accountants, um, really not understanding what they were doing in a deal, getting people into really terrible situations. I saw this one couple lose a $40,000 deposit because the contract had not been written correctly. I saw one person get into a business where the sellers had sold a whole bunch of gift cards to the business just before the transaction, and then they took that money and left, and the buyer ended up with all these people trying to cash gift cards that he didn't get money for. And that one ended up in a lawsuit and just all this terrible stuff. And I knew that I didn't know how to help people buy and sell a business, but I knew that what I was seeing was obviously not right. So I went looking for an opportunity and found an international business brokerage name that I could join up with. And they gave me access to a training program. So over like a 2-year period, I actually participated in what would be something similar to like an insurance licensing kind of program where you have to take different classes and things. So over a 2.5-year program, I became certified as a business intermediary. I was the first person in New Brunswick to ever be certified in doing this. And then over the course of the next 3 years, I helped 35 people sell their businesses. And it was really exciting and a lot of fun. And it was also the worst business I've ever been a part of because it's entirely modeled after real estate. And so what we would do is we would find someone who wanted to sell their business, charge them a very small engagement fee. And then when we sold the business, we would charge them a commission. But you see, sometimes it would take a year to 2 years to convince somebody to actually list their business for sale. And once they listed it for sale, then we had to prepare it. And sometimes it took 6 months for us to get all the stuff we needed out of the business owner to actually be able to put it on the market. And then we had to try to find a buyer. And there were some files that we worked on for 3 years before we sold them, right? So you can just imagine these timelines, these huge amounts of time. So in the 3.5 years I did this, there were 3 different periods of 7 to 9 months long with no closings, which meant 7 to 9 months with no income, but expenses every month. And so I would close a deal and be afraid to spend the money, knowing that I had these expenses coming up. And then by the time I would close the next deal, I'd be in the red. So the commission would just like cover off the debts, right? So I had 2 young kids at the time. It was just super stressful. And after 3.5 years, I said, I can't live this way anymore. So I transferred the office to one of my associates. I could tell you that I sold it, but that would just be me trying to protect my ego. What actually happened was I handed over the keys and I said, give me a percentage of every file that's already going when you close it, and we'll be good. And so basically, I became that seller with an interest in him being successful. So I wanted to support him and everything. And over the course of the next couple of years, he did close some of those files. And I ended up with a few paychecks, which was great. But I became a banker. So I was doing my banking job full time. And after about 4 years of that, the bank reorganized and I was given a buyout package. And I said, you know what? I think I want to get back in that small business transition game, but I want to do it differently. And so I thought about what I was doing and the work I was doing and how I wasn't getting paid unless the business was sold. And I thought about all the deals that slipped through my fingers, like the times that business owners would come in and talk with me, and then I would hear later they sold it on their own. And I thought, I think that people are willing to pay for value. So I created a new kind of business. So now I help people buy and sell businesses, but I do it as a consultant. So I don't charge any commissions for anything. And when I work with people, they pay me for everything I do along the way. And I have a menu of services. So I've broken down buying and selling into several steps. Each step has a price. And when I work with people who want to sell, for example, the first step is the evaluation. I'll do the evaluation, they pay me, and then they decide if they want to go to market or not. And if they do, they can hire me to do the business profile package, we call it, which is the buyer facing document that presents their business to the buyer. And then if they want help to find a buyer, then we will run an ad campaign for them confidentially online and we'll manage the inquiries for them. But we just charge them for doing the service. And so at the end of the day, when they do finally sell their business, and we've helped dozens of people do this, there's no commission. But I'm also not waiting to get paid until someone sells their business. Every person I work with is paying me. And I've actually come to realize that the the commission-based brokerage model really is not fair to the best entrepreneurs. Because the reason why I had to charge 12% commission rate when I was a business broker was because I had to try to earn a six-figure income over the course of the year. That's what I'm worth, based on my education, experience, etc. And I was only selling, you know, five, six, seven businesses. Some of them the commissions would be 20 grand, others the commissions might be 100. But I had to earn enough from the deals that closed to compensate me for all the time I was spending on the deals that never closed, which meant that
Yeah.
successful entrepreneurs building good businesses were
Being
subsidizing my efforts
penalized.
to sell the crappy businesses,
Yeah.
right? So
That's a
today,
very interesting perspective on it.
yeah, today, whether
Yeah.
the business is good or bad, I serve them the same way and they pay the same price. And, I have a more regular cash flow. And there's also not the conflict anymore. When I was a business broker, I got paid for selling businesses. So when a buyer would come in, my inclination would be to try to get them to buy a business I had for sale. When I work with buyers today, I have no such conflict. My only, professional outcome that I'm looking for is to help them and help them be satisfied, help them find problems or better manage the risk in a deal, and to help them not overpay so that they're successful and they spread the word that I'm a good guy to work with. And so the lack of conflict in helping buyers helps me point out when I want to tell them, like, do not do this deal. This is a no-go deal. Save your money. I actually say that there's two successful outcomes when you go looking to buy a business. People only think about one. They think about buying a business and having positive cash flow and getting rich. But the other successful outcome is spotting all the bad deals and keeping your money. To me, that's equally a good outcome.
Yeah, definitely. Um, what do you love the most about this? I know you love knowledge. I know that you just love learning and mastering. I think that you are one of the people that I've met in my life that is always working towards mastery of what they're doing. But yeah, so what makes you love this thing so much? This niche?
I I enjoy helping my clients avoid bad deals, not just the buyers but also the sellers. Um, if you own a business and you go to a business
Yeah,
broker and say,
yeah.
I want to sell my business, it might be a terrible business that could never sell, but the broker could likely say yes because they want to get the listing in the hopes that they might sell it, right? And when I work with a seller and show them how nobody would likely ever want to buy their business because of the reality of their situation, then they can actually make a real plan to move on to the next chapter of their life and not get stuck in this limbo. I've met people who have had their business for sale for 2 or 3 years, and they'll find me on YouTube eventually because they get frustrated. They're like, how come it won't sell? And they'll hire me to do a review of their financials and the marketing package, and I'll show them, like, you're asking 900,000 for this business. Here's why it would likely sell for 350. And because of your industry and the way that you're operating, you'd likely need to finance half of that. I've had people, like, after those meetings say, "Oh my God, 3 months into selling, someone made me that offer, but the broker I was working with told me I could get more." And, like, they had their opportunity to exit and they missed it because their expectations weren't properly aligned. And so showing people the reality of the situation and what their true opportunities are, that's what's rewarding in the work, is knowing that I'm helping people get on the road to where they need to go next. There's this idea that gets spread by media that you build a business as a successful entrepreneur and then you're going to cash out by selling it and have all these millions of dollars. Those are at those are like 4 standard deviations away from the norm. The reality of most small business transactions is that because of the risks involved, sellers get a multiple of cash flow of like 2 to 3 times, which means that Most of the time when I'm talking to someone about their business, they see the result of the evaluation. They go, oh my God, I could have the same money if I just stayed here for the next few years. And they're absolutely correct. So people do not sell their businesses to cash out. People sell their businesses because they can no longer run them. And this usually is because of a pressing personal motivation. There's 5 of them. There's burnout, boredom, and fatigue, divorce, poor health, the need to relocate, and finally retirement. And when one of those things comes into someone's life, then they need to look at selling the business. So the true benefit of being a business owner is not the exit. It's the ownership. It's the time you are the owner and you're enjoying the cash flow. And so when I meet with roomfuls of business owners, I insist that they take this away. You have to run your business in a profitable way. So you're taking money out of it every year. And there's 101 ways why people want to do this, that, or the other thing to try to hide money and save taxes and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, if you're going to make real money, you're going to end up paying taxes. You need to have financial statements that show you're profitable, and you need to take that money out of your business and you need to build wealth outside the business. Because here's the other thing that people don't like to know. Of all the businesses that go up on the big business for sale websites like bizbuysell.com, 80% never sell. And so not only is cashing out for multi-millions, a unicorn, kind of thing, the average result is that 80% of small businesses don't sell. They just end up winding up and liquidating, maybe selling their stuff, right? And so as you are the operator and owner of a business, you've got to be managing it in a way where you make money and you take that money and you have other wealth outside the business, investments, et cetera, just like employees have to do to take care of their retirement. And you build that wealth outside your business. And if you do a great job at building your business and you employ the systems and the operating procedures and all that kind of stuff that we talk about, then yes, your chances of selling it are going to increase. If you do a really great job of implementing all those things, maybe you don't even have to sell. And
Yeah,
and
it
and
will roll
and
on itself.
that's the most lucrative exit there is, where you can exit without actually giving up the ownership. And so if you're going to aim for something that you control the outcome to, because finding a stranger to come write you a check for your business, you don't control a lot of that. You don't control the timeline. You don't control who the buyer is going to be. You don't control the availability of credit that they're going to have access to or any of those things. But if you say, I'm going to build a business that's profitable, I'm going to take money out and invest it someplace else, you control that. If you then say, I'm going to bring in systems, processes, procedures so that I can spend less and less time in my business, you can control that. And then if you can, spend your 60s and into your early 70s owning a business where you spend, 8 or 10 hours a week kind of looking at things, I mean, that is the most lucrative kind of outcome that someone could ever have.
How does AI and automation change the game in terms of acquisition? Because we're seeing things being done by itself, lowering. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think that we're to a place where right now AI and automation can take tasks, but they can't take jobs. But when you're evaluating a company that eventually can sustain itself with some form of automation, I guess that increases EBITDA, that increases the value of a company. So how do you play in that field with this new emergent technology from 1986? But you understand what I mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. So here's the big difference between evaluating like the stock of publicly traded companies versus small businesses. When you're going to buy a share of Coca-Cola, not only are you buying a piece of all of their factories and the trucks and the fact that there's a delivery driver who knows how to do their job, but you're also getting the whole leadership team and you're getting their plan for the future. And so this is why stock market analysts are going to use methods of evaluating shares that look forward into expected EBITDA in the future. And this is where your idea about how will AI make this better, it really comes into play. This is why there are companies on the stock exchange with really high valuations. People are expecting that they're going to earn more because of these new tools. In the world of small business, the leadership is almost always the owner. And so when somebody buys a small business, that leadership brain trust is actually leaving and it's being replaced by the buyer. And so you will find very
Oof.
few, very
You
few
just changed my
buyers.
perspective on this. Okay, it's super interesting.
And
True,
you,
right?
you're very, very few buyers are going to be willing to pay a price for the work that they're going to do in the future, right? And so small business valuation is almost entirely based upon past performance. People want to see, what have you done with this business? What is the profitability you can prove and demonstrate? And then someone will make a purchase decision based on that cash flow under the assumption that the cash flow will continue. But the reason they might want to do the deal is because they have insights like what you've just shared. Like they might say, I think it's a good idea to buy this kind of business because I can see how I can bring in some AI or automation to make it better for me. Now, is it going to drive up EBITDA? Well, it will for the first people that employ the automation. But then, of course, as the secrets get out of the bag and everybody starts to employ the same tricks, different forces come into play. And I would say that the best example will be aerodynamics in long haul trucking. So back in the 1980s, there were a lot of these flat fronted trucks on the highway, and they weren't very aerodynamic. And then all of a sudden, they got these noses, which helped them cut through the air more, and those trucks were more fuel efficient. And then they got these funny hats on top that helped to curve the air over the top of the trailer. And now they've got these little skirts on the side that keep the air from going under the tires, right? And so it's like every one of these innovations, the first mover saves money and becomes more profitable because their trucks are more aerodynamic. But then once everybody has the innovation, then they're all competing on a level playing field again, and the savings end up being passed along to customers because the prices get competed down. And then the next innovation comes along that someone tries to implement to get that advantage again. So, I know a lot of people who are fearful for the future because they say, what's everybody going to do with all of these AI people, AI agents taking the jobs? And I always point out, you know, we have like chiropractors and physiotherapists and life coaches and like all of these things that didn't seem to exist when I was a kid or didn't exist to the same degree. And all of these, YouTubers, like all these different jobs or ways people have of making a living didn't exist 20 years ago. And all they are ways that we serve each other. And so as people implement these innovations and people get liberated from, simple repetitive tasks in an office environment, yeah, are there going to be fewer people working at the insurance broker's office? Probably.
Yeah.
But there's going to be other opportunities that are going to be created through this. And more people are just going to find a new way in life to make money. I'm rather
It's
optimistic
survival.
about the
It's
future.
human, it's human survival. We find ways to get by, to make things
Absolutely.
happen, right? And I think the beauty of humans is the imagination and the creativity, right? So that's something that an algorithm cannot necessarily put together as well as a predictive model based on a human mind. So, well, our many human minds, but still, right?
I think that the best advice I've ever heard is that as more and more AI comes into the world, the best move for a human is just to double down on being human. Like
Exactly. I agree with that.
focus on the things that only we know how to do, um, and you're always going to find some kind of opportunity.
And I always make the comment that I believe that the economical unit of humans are emotions, right? And when the only thing that we can do as human is make other people feel, right? And that's what business is about. That's what trade is about. It's buying a business. It's about hope and feeling and all of these things. Conversation is
Yeah, I
always,
agree.
yeah. So conversations are always interesting with you, David. I appreciated that. We did a big 54 minutes of a cappella, no, we didn't follow the plan at all, which is great. Um, what would be your last words for people that want to understand more about buying and selling, but also in the future we're seeing a lot of people growing older, the baby boomers are exiting or have already exited. We're seeing more businesses being almost ready to sell, but they're not selling. What's up in the market? What can we take? What's the opportunities that are out there?
I think that what you have to do is figure out what you're willing to do and look for opportunities that fit within your box of what you're willing to do. And you have to have a very clearly defined intent or limits to what you're willing to do as far as a deal or anything like that. Yes, baby boomers are going to be retiring. Um, that does not necessarily mean that there's going to be good deals on businesses because if you look at the market for aluminum canoes, once I buy one, I don't need another one, right? But the reality is in the world of business that if you are a successful pharmacist and you have a profitable pharmacy and another one comes up for sale, you can buy that one and then you can buy the next one and the next one and the next one. So good profitable businesses always have a multitude of buyers looking for them. So the fact that the boomers want to retire and sell their businesses does not mean the price of good businesses is going to go down. It does mean there are going to be a lot of businesses, like I said, the 80% that are never going to sell. So my advice to people is if you want to profit from the retiring baby boom generation, even if you cannot find a good deal on a business that makes sense to buy and is profitable and you can transfer over to yourself, look at the industries dominated by those owners. Because if they can't sell and they end up closing, the customers they serve have to go someplace else. And so the economic transfer is going to happen, whether it's through business sales or closures, and customers just move someplace else. So, I point this out to gray haired crowds all the time, especially, it's very easy for business owners to overestimate the value of their business or to think it's worth a lot more than it really is. That's one of the biggest revelations that happens when I do a business analysis and show people what their business will likely really sell for. The biggest pushback I get is always, but I have all the customers, I have all the sales, I have all this, I have all that. And one of the things I often do is I go through the thought experiment of starting something. And what we see is that somebody could often, if somebody wants $1 million for their business that really should be selling for 500 grand, I'll show them that somebody could probably hire people, get into business, do a bunch of marketing, lose money for 2.5 years, and still spend less than 400, right? Now, does it make more sense for that person to pay 500 and buy your existing business? Yeah, probably. It doesn't make sense for them to pay $1 million, right? And so the biggest problem is when people have put all their eggs in one basket, where they really have this thought that the business is a truly valuable thing and that they're depending on its sale to finance their retirement. I call them aspirational sellers. And it's not that they think the business is worth $1 million. It's their financial planner told them they need $1 million to retire. And so then they think that they can somehow find the right candidate to fit into that box. And and you can find people that don't quite know what they're doing when they're buying a business who will agree to overpay for a business. But by the time they get to the bank or their accountant or their lawyer, somebody is going to show them that the deal doesn't make sense. And
Hopefully.
I've met so many people who've actually signed contracts with buyers for ridiculous prices. And then 6, 8, 10 months later, after due diligence and back and forth, the deal finally falls apart. And I'll show them in 5 minutes why it did, because it could never have been sold at that price anyway.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you again so very much, David.